All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another exciting episode of Firebase Semi-live. So let's see, where did we leave off last time? We got a version of Friendly Eats that we are running locally. Not only are we hosting the web pages locally, but we're also talking to a local version of Cloud Firestore. We also have a Cloud function that is also talking to Cloud Firestore. And what we've done is we've gone through the trouble of sort of grabbing our user ID. And within our Cloud function, it's going ahead and getting that user document. And we're spitting it out to the console so we can kind of see, oh, look, there's your list of your favorite restaurants. Now, if you had to stop from the last video and are getting back into this again, please note that if you are starting up your emulators again, calling, emulator start, Cloud Firestore will have been wiped out, your local version. So you're going to have to not only create new restaurants again, but you're also going to need to make sure that this user ID is the same as it was. And also you have sort of the right restaurants populated in this favorites array. So make sure that these restaurants still exist and that they're sort of not old IDs of restaurants that no longer exist, because that will run into errors later. In my case, here's a little bit of movie magic. I'm actually still just continuing from part 4. So that's why my hair hasn't grown at all. So there you go. Let's keep going now. So we're at the point within our Cloud function here where we've gotten our favorites document, and now we want to actually go through the trouble of sort of looking at each of those individual restaurant IDs and retrieving that restaurant data to finally give us the output of our Cloud function. So let's keep going here. Let's see here. So I'm going to say let const favorites equal user data dot favorites. And this is giving me an error here. It's like, hey, this object is possibly undefined. Yeah, when you're working in TypeScript, it will sometimes, sort of the way maybe Swift also and maybe Kotlin when you're sort of dealing with optionals, it's like, hey, you haven't properly dealt with this. What if this is null? What are you going to do then, huh? So you have to make sure you sort of properly handle that. So easiest way is maybe let's just do this. If not user data, then we can, under our response.send, no favorites, sad face, and we'll return. So now once we've done that, TypeScript is smart enough to be like, okay, well now at this point, I know user data has to actually exist. So hopefully you're able to grab favorites from it. And now let's iterate through this list, through this array. So we'll do favorites for each. And this element will be a, we'll call it a rest ID, which happens to be a string. And let's see, under our console, we'll log like, hey, going to fetch data for restaurant. And here we'll call rest ID. And then we'll do admin. Actually, don't need admin. Firestore.doc. Restaurants / rest ID .get. So let's see, two things. First, let me spell restaurants right. And we're kind of getting this error because this is telling me, well, we're doing a whole bunch of weird, bad things here. We're getting this document, but then we're not doing anything with it. This is also, it's an asynchronous call. It's a promise, and it's like, hey, these promises need to be handled appropriately. So let's see, what can we do here? What's the best way? So let's do this. I'm going to create a constant called fetch promises. And this will be an empty array. And then down here, we're going to say that our, we'll call it our next promise. I think most people will just call that P, is our Firestore, fetch, where it's trying to fetch that appropriate restaurant document. And what we can do is under fetch promises, we're going to push that next promise. Let's spell push correctly. And so basically what's happening here is I know I kind of went through this fast. If you're not familiar with promises a whole lot, what I've done is, each of these asynchronous calls, as you recall, returns a promise. I'm storing all these promises in an array because promises themselves have this neat little sort of class level function called all that says, hey, you know what? Here's a bunch of asynchronous calls I want you to run. When they have all resolved, then keep going. And in our case, because we are fetching a number of different restaurants all at the same time, that's what we want to do here. So sort of we're taking each of these individual restaurant fetches, putting them into our fetch promises array, and then what we can do is we can say promise.all fetch promises. So sort of wait for all these promises to resolve, and then in our snapshots, we can then like console.log, got this snapshot. Or wait, let's do some string interpolation. Sorry. Snapshot. Because this is actually going to be a whole bunch of snapshots. And then response.send, done fetching. So let's see here. First, we got a few errors here. So let's go on. First one is saying no floating promises because once again, this itself returns a promise. And in general, you generally sort of want to return or chain or do something with these promises. In my case, I'm going to return it. So basically, I'm telling the Cloud function, this is kind of the last promise that I want you to wait to resolve before you terminate this function and say it's completed. I've noticed that I'm going to once again run into that terrible error where it will try and call response.send twice unless I add in that explicit return call. And it's saying, oh, that's actually not reachable. So maybe that's OK, but I don't know. Here, let's just put this behind an else. That's going to make me feel better. And then our other error is it's saying, hey, fetch promises. You haven't really, told me what the type is. I kind of need that. This is kind of a long-winded way of doing this here, but actually it's not so bad. So it's basically a promise. Fetch promises is an array of promises. And we're going to say, well, your type is, or sort of your generic type is document snapshot. If I can spell right. You people are making me nervous. There we go. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, OK, you are an array of promises that are essentially going to resolve to document snapshots when you're done. And well, actually, here, let's run this and then see maybe if we can clean this up a little bit. Make sure at least right now we don't have any errors. So npm run build. And it's telling me import e require express. Oh, I think TypeScript or VS Code was trying to be a little over helpful here. In importing some libraries that I no longer needed because I probably had a typo at one point. Let's try that again. All right, seems to be working. Let's go ahead and run this function again. Cannot read property for each of undefined. I wonder why. On request at line 27. Oh, I see. What happened here is, again, I actually don't need favorites.array. I just need favorites.forEach. I think, again, code completion got a little overzealous in helping me here. So let's fix that. Run this one more time. All right, yay, done fetching. And it looks like if we check out our logs, it found our two restaurants. It said, I'm going to get data for this restaurant. I'm going to get data for this restaurant. And then in sort of once my promises got resolved, I got these two snapshots. I got this object and this other object. Again, not super helpful there. Thanks for telling me it's an object. I'd love to know a little more about it maybe. So let's see. Let's see if we can fix this a little bit. So the first thing we can actually do is we can make this an async and await call. So I'm going to say const snapshots equals await promise.all fetch promises. And then I sort of don't need this little bit here. So that's, I don't know, I like that. It's a little cleaner. And again, you know, basically our code is just going to sort of wait for this whole thing to resolve before it moves on in my code. So that's nice. And then why don't we log some data here? So yay, we got those snapshots, but maybe this would be better if we just did like a little forEach in here. So let's say, here, we'll say const response array equals, this will be like an array of document data. And it'll start empty, and we'll kind of say, hey, you know what, snapshots for each snapshot. And what we will do is let's just response array push snapshot dot data. And close that up. And then maybe we can do like a done fetching. This is what I have. And let's just show the response array, see what that looks like. All right, so it's giving us an error because it's like, hey, snapshot.data could also be undefined. Also, I have these quotes at the end here. You know, so I should probably just add like if snapshot.data, but you know what? I'm going to force unwrap this. This is my way of saying, hey, I am sure at this point snapshot.data exists. And if it doesn't, you probably have my permission to crash or something. Let's run this. We'll go ahead and npm run build it. Run this, reload. Well, again, not super useful. Let's see if we can, instead of that, can we call util.inspect on response array? And again, notice how quickly we're able to iterate through all this because we're essentially just running. Hey, there we go. So you notice now we have an array that's got our restaurant data in it, right? You can see our city, our restaurant name, drive-through prime. Here's our other one. This is a place drive-through over in Oklahoma, right? Like this seems to actually contain the data we're interested in. So that's pretty good. We now have a Cloud function that is reading in our user document, grabbing our favorites array, and then grabbing all those individual restaurant documents and putting them into this output. So that's pretty nice. Here, I'll do one little bit of cleanup before you all yell at me anyway, because you're gonna. I can say, you know, response array. Let's do a map. I think we can just do, you know what, response array equals snapshots dot map, and in here we'll say for every individual snapshot, let's get snapshot.data. Basically, this is just sort of a I don't know, slightly more functional way of saying, hey, what we'll do is we'll take our snapshots, and for every snapshot in there, we're going to take snapshot.data, and that's going to be sort of what exists in our response array. Let's try that one more time. Run that. Found one error. All right, because basically, now that I've no longer explicitly called document data, I probably don't need that anymore. I will probably need it again at some point, but for now, I guess we'll leave it out so that NPM is happy, or I guess TypeScript is happy. They don't like you bundling in libraries that you don't need. And actually for good reason. For all those libraries that you include that you end up not needing, you're going to sort of expand the cold start time of your functions. And that's bad, right? So like it's trying to like be helpful here and be like, hey, let's not add in any libraries that you don't need that's going to slow down your cold start time. So thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll go back here. Let's reload this. Done fetching. This is what I have, undefined, undefined. Well, why is it undefined? Probably because apparently I still need to return this. All right. Sorry about that. Let's try that one more time. All right, yay, we got a restaurant info back. All right. Hey, how are we doing on time?
14.
14 minutes. You know what? I think we probably got time to like call this function directly from our app. So let's do that. That'll be a good stopping point for today. Maybe we'll go a little long, but it's all right. I think it'll be worth it. All right. So you'll notice that right now I am making a sort of an HTTP call, right? Like where I'm basically just sort of calling this Cloud function directly within a browser. What Cloud Functions supports is something called a callable function, which within your application allows you to kind of query these functions almost as if they were sort of like built-in methods that you could call within the library. It does a lot of the sort of behind-the-scenes work of like passing in your authentication information, making sure you're properly authenticated by the time your app sort of or your function gets that data, so they can properly get your user ID and sort of properly encapsulating the data that gets sent back and forth. I'm not explaining it really well. Go ahead and read the documentation if you want to know more about callable Cloud Functions. But that's what we're doing is we're creating a Cloud function that you could ping directly within your app as if it were sort of any other like, API call or something. It's pretty useful, but we got to include a little code to get that to work. So let's do that now. Over in index.html, in addition, here, let's jump to the bottom here. In addition to loading up Firebase app and auth and Firebase Firestore, let's also add Firebase functions. That's going to include the JavaScript we need to go ahead and call our functions. And then let's see. I'm going to create a new function here called friendly-eats. Prototype. We'll call it getFavorites. And this will be a function. And we'll get our user ID equals firebase.auth.currentuser.uid. Sorry, there we go. And then our getFavorites function will equal firebase.functions HTTP callable. And in my case, it'll be getFavorites underscore v0. And so basically then what I can do is I can say, I'm just going to call my getFavorites function. And I'll pass in whatever user data I need to pass in, like our UID, which equals our current user ID. And we'll kind of chain it then function result, and we'll console log that result. What do I have wrong here? I have missing a closed parentheses. There we go. Right, so this is kind of neat, right? Just by sort of telling Firebase functions, or I guess Cloud Functions for Firebase, hey, there's this getFavorites function that is HTTP callable. I can then essentially just kind of ping it as if it were sort of some other native call, and I can sort of pass in whatever arguments I need to and kind of wait for it to resolve, and then kind of deal with the result as I get it back. So that's kind of neat. Here, let's save this. And if we reload, oh, unexpected token, because I misspelled function. There we go. And should add in a little semicolon at the end there. And let's remove that superfluous new line. All right. Run it again. Click. Oh, yeah. Ha! My button isn't hooked up to actually call the function. I should probably do that too. So under friendlyeats.view, where I'm saying, hey, let's look at your favorites, let's call getFavorites. Alrighty. Now, is it going to work? And the answer is no, because it's like, hey, getFavorites is not a function. And the reason for this is kind of, again, if you're used to JavaScript-y stuff, you're probably, if you're used to JavaScript-y stuff, this probably is, very, you know what's wrong. You're like, oh, of course, you forgot to do that thing. Basically, what happens is, and I'm not sure I'm actually going to explain this very well, but you'll notice that when I sort of run into this error, this is no longer my friendlyeats object, right? This now essentially refers to like, here, let's just log it. Is it actually the button? I actually thought it was going to be the whole window. Either way, like what's happening has to do with like a scope encapsulation closure issue where this no longer means what I think it does. This, I actually thought it sort of referred to sort of the JavaScript window element. Maybe it's actually just referring to the button. Either way, not actually the thing I want to call because it does not have a function called getFavorites. What I want is this friendlyeats object. That's the thing that has the getFavorites function. And so you'll notice down here they do this thing called var that equals this. And that's basically why that's why they have this, that equals this. Boy, if you're not a native English speaker, I apologize. But that's why they have this thing here, is so that it kind of remembers what this means at the time. This essentially meaning the friendlyeats object that has these functions like getFavorites, like render template, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to move that line up here. And what this will do is I can then say, hey, within this function, call that.getFavorites. And that is going to actually still retain the proper reference to friendlyeats. I don't know if I explained it well. I still, every once in a while, I'm like, I don't know whether I should be using that or this. I'm just going to call one and see which one gets me the error, which is a terrible way of engineering. I should know what I'm doing. But hopefully that was a simple enough explanation. So let's rerun this again. Probably no longer need this breakpoint. Let's keep going. And, well, this is a little more promising. It seems to actually be trying to call under in this. My callable, I think the problem is this supposed to be HTTPS callable maybe? Was that my problem? I think that was probably my problem. All right. I made progress. It doesn't look it, but I've made progress because it's no longer the same error. It's now a different error, which is like, what are you doing trying to call, central semi-live cloud functions, from localhost? That's not allowed. And basically, I think the issue is that, well, it could be multiple issues. It might not actually be a CORS error. It might be due to the fact that I haven't deployed this function to semi-live cloud functions, and what it's actually giving me back is an error object that my browser is interpreting as a CORS error. I think that's actually what's happening. Either way, the issue has to do with the fact that I am calling my production server from my locally hosted version that's supposed to be talking to locally hosted versions of Cloud Functions. So easy fix. Going to go back up to here. And at the beginning where I'm saying, hey, you know what? If we're local, not only are we going to set, Firestore to talk to sort of our local version of Cloud Firestore, but we can also tell Firebase.functions, if I can spell functions right, use functions emulator. And here we're going to say HTTP, sorry, localhost 5001. I believe that is the proper code here. We'll call this. All right. Progress. You don't think it's progress, but this is total progress, because you'll notice now it's still sort of this weird error that is not the right kind of error, or it's not really a CORS error. It's telling me, but you'll notice that now it's actually trying to go to the right server. It's trying to go to localhost 5001, which is what we want, right? This is actually the URL of the function. And the issue is that basically on the server side, I can't just do this. On the server side, I can't just make this an HTTP on request type of function. I actually have to do an HTTP HTTPS.onCall function. So what does that mean? Basically, it looks exactly the same almost. So here, let's rename this to get Firebase. We'll call it like Resty. And what we'll do is our get favorites, sorry, .v0 equals functions HTTPS on call. And you'll notice now I'm passing in two things, data and context. And you know what? I'm basically just going to copy and paste this stuff into here and then make a few changes as appropriate. So you'll notice now there's no longer a request object. So to get the user ID, it's no longer the request.query.id. It's basically just data.uid. I'm pretty sure that data object just essentially represents, if we jump back to here, that data object just basically represents this object that's being passed in. So we got that. We no longer are like calling response.send. We're just going to return stuff. And you know what? Since I think our function is eventually going to expect an array, what I'm going to do is most of these response.sends, let's just do a console.log of like no favorites. And we'll return an empty array. Similarly, let's make this console.log. And then we will return our response array. And then here, I guess we'll only get here if user ID didn't exist. So here, console.log, no user ID, which is sad. And we'll return, once again, an empty array. And that's looking pretty good. You might be wondering, by the way, like, do I have to return this response array where I've sort of grabbed like this snapshot.data? And the answer is yes. As much as I was hoping you could sort of like return like native documents or native like snapshot.data or native snapshots within a callable function, you can't quite do that. You still basically kind of need to return what's essentially JSON. And then on the client side of things, we're going to have to sort of reinterpret that JSON into something kind of resembling a Cloud Firestore document. So the one thing that, and we'll sort of get into this in the next video, in most of our other functions, we're basically able to look at the data that we get back and be like, oh, OK, this is a document, right? But like when it comes to the data that we're going to actually get back from this callable function, we're going to look at it as a JSON object. So all right, that was a lot of work, but I think if we run build this, hopefully I didn't introduce any errors. I did, but that's because I did not include that. There we go. Sorry. Didn't include the end parentheses. And then it's saying, hey, do you want to maybe make this async? And yes, I do. All right. Run build that again. And you'll notice now it's telling me, hey, you sort of got like these two different functions. Now we've got get favorites and get favorites resty. So let's go back into, actually here, let's make sure get favorites resty still looks OK. And it does. Let's go into here and call our callable function. Did it work? It doesn't quite. Wait. It did. Look at that. Sorry, very first time you call a function, it's going to take a little bit because of the whole cold start and all of that. This will probably be faster if I do it again. Yeah, that was faster. And you'll notice that now what I get back is an array. And in that array, I got these objects. And these objects look an awful lot like restaurants, which is fantastic. So, gee, we got a Cloud function that kind of does the thing that we're looking to do. Maybe in the next video, we'll actually implement this and get it working in our app so we can see our favorite restaurants. So I know this was maybe a little longer than usual, but I think we actually made some pretty good progress here. Here you go. Here's that final function if you want to take a look at it, do a little screenshot. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in a few days on another episode of Firebase Semi-live. Thanks, everybody.